Hey folks, so this week we're getting into the cluster B personality disorders. But before I talk about that, I do want to just chat a little bit about your paper. Some of you have already started emailing me asking about this next paper that's coming up. That won't be due, of course, until we get through all of these. I believe on the syllabus it says November 20th is that due date, which is still a couple weeks out for us. So we may stick with that just depending on how comfortable people feel and how much of this I get through today, and then how much of this last cluster I get through next week. Just want to make sure that you guys feel comfortable, that you understand these personality disorders before you're writing a paper on it. So basically what you're doing here, and one of the things that I've been trying to get you to do, or the way that I structure this class, is to go from thinking about disorders broadly, from sort of what you read in the textbook, to thinking about how is it going to show up, how can it look different based on culture, based on identity. Both of those pieces are pretty theoretical, and that's fine. You just have to learn it that way. And even beyond this class, if you go on to grad school or get some type of clinical degree, a lot of it's still just going to be theoretical. But I do like to orient you towards thinking about how this stuff looks on real people. And so one of the reasons that, for instance, in this section, I show you a lot of examples. That's one of the things that kind of makes this a bit of a lengthier section, even if these videos aren't much longer, as I'm still throwing in a lot of videos for you guys to watch as examples. But one of the reasons I do that, and one of the reasons this last paper and indeed your final are going to be a bit different than kind of typical tests or typical papers, is because I'm really trying to shift you into thinking about psychological disorders with regard to real people, or at least, at the very least, characters. That is to say, not just on the page, this symptom, that symptom, but how does that show up? What does that look like? Is that just a normal angry behavior, or somebody just in a bad mood? Or does that look more like depression or some type of anxiety or some type of personality disorder? So that's my real goal for these assignments. That's my real goal for the way that I even teach the class, is to get you to shift from that. This is what the book says, to how to recognize it. And you're not going to get, again, all the way there, but I do want to kind of push you in that direction. So this paper, this next paper that you're going to be doing, and I believe you also have the option here to do a presentation. I will double check on that for you, because usually when we're doing these things in class, it is necessarily a presentation, but obviously the logistics of that would be a bit different and maybe even difficult to do via this modality. But so we'll look into that. But what I'm going to be asking you to do is find a public figure, somebody who's a celebrity, somebody who's in government, somebody who's maybe an athlete, these type of things, or find a realistic, somewhat realistic, I guess I should say, character in a TV show, in a movie, in a book, in a comic book, whatever it is. And what I'm asking you to do is to find the traits, find folks who exhibit a lot of the traits of some of these personality disorders that we're talking about. Now, why I'm saying it that way and not saying find someone who is a, say, narcissist or has a narcissistic personality disorder is because ethically, psychologists and even psychology students are bound to not diagnose people who are not their actual client, right? So it is unethical to just see somebody out in the world, to see somebody on TV, and then say, okay, this person's got this disorder, right? You don't know that if you're not their therapist, if you're not their doctor in some kind of way where you know the ins and outs of what's going on, you know how they behave in this situation versus that one, right? And so we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to go out and diagnose people that aren't our real clients. But you don't have real clients, and this is just a teaching modality. So I'm trying to split this difference here. I'm trying to find a good place. where you can get what you need to do, you can get this experience, but you also aren't being unethical. So the way that I handle that is by having you just talk about traits. We're not diagnosing anybody, even a cartoon character. We're just saying this person has several traits of this particular disorder. And so broadly, that's what you're going to be doing for this next paper or presentation, is you're going to choose somebody, again, character or some type of public figure who you think matches the traits, the broad traits of each of these personality disorders that we've been talking about for the last couple and into next week. So you're going to take that person and you're going to look for actual examples that meet the criteria that we're talking about in these classes. So if you chose, I don't know, Bugs Bunny, and you wanted to say that Bugs Bunny was a narcissist, right? And we're going to talk about narcissistic traits today. Well, you need to maybe go find some quotes or some actions or some demonstrations of feeling that match up with what we're going to learn about narcissism that suggests that he has those traits. Now, it's also important to me that I teach you how you would actually diagnose a personality disorder. And one of the most important details, of course, and we've talked about this, but just to hit on it again, is inflexible and pervasive. Pervasive and inflexible. That means that if I'm looking at Bugs Bunny and I'm trying to see, is Bugs Bunny a narcissist? Well, let's go down my list. Does he do this? Does he do this? Does he do this? Fine, that's helpful. That gets us in one direction. But the other thing I have to do is do that pervasive and inflexible check. That is to say, I need to be also looking for times when he isn't doing this. So let's say that a narcissist is a person who always thinks they're the best person, they're the greatest gift to the world, and they talk to people in that capacity. They're happy to share with them how great they are. Well, if I'm really trying to make an evaluation if somebody might be narcissistic, the thing that I would have to do is to not just see if they meet these traits, I need to be making sure that they are always demonstrating these traits, pervasive and inflexible. So if I see that Bugs Bunny in another occasion in another video is saying, yeah, you know, I'm not really good at such and such, and that's not really important to me to be the number one person in class, or to be the best so-and-so, or to have people think I'm such a great person. Sometimes I'd rather just sit back and let somebody else take the limelight, right? That, even though he did the stuff that we talked about, even though he met these criteria when we looked at them in terms of does he ever, I also am seeing over here that sometimes he doesn't. And maybe often he doesn't. Maybe half the time he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't at home, but he does at work, right? And so I have to make sure that if I'm beginning to work on a personality disorder diagnosis, not only am I just looking for the traits, that's enough for those Axis 1 disorders. If you can say, for the past 2 weeks, I haven't been eating well, I've been really sad, blah, 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 I don't have to also go look and say, well, have you ever not been sad in those 2 weeks? Did you ever put a smile on your face? You don't have to do that with those Axis 1 disorders. You don't have to say to somebody, have you ever not been anxious, in order to diagnose them with an anxiety disorder. But with a personality disorder, you do have to do that. You do have to say, are there times when you're not the best person in the room? A narcissist would say, no, probably not. Not very often, at least they would say. Right? They're not going to give on that. They're not going to say, oh, well, yeah, right? A normal person would say, yeah. I mean, if I'm in the room with Serena Williams, then I'm not the best tennis player in the room. If I'm in the room with Albert Einstein, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. So most folks are able to kind of see that caveat, right? But a narcissist, pervasive and inflexible, right? They're going to have a really hard time coming up with somebody who's better at them than most things, but especially something that they think that they're pretty good at, or that even other folks would recognize they're pretty good at. So I say all that to say, as you begin to think about putting this paper together, as you begin to start looking for characters or figures that you think that you could use, and maybe collecting some data in that regard, You also need to make sure that you're looking for those times when they're not doing those things, to be sure that that would be, again, we're not actually diagnosing, but to make sure that that would be a diagnosis that you could perhaps give if you were their clinician. The other thing that I think is really important to do here is some of these disorders have a lot in common. When we start looking at these cluster B here in a minute, you're going to see that they actually have a lot of kind of crossover traits, a lot of crossover symptomology, if you will. And so it's also important to do what we call ruling out some of these other disorders. So if somebody, really likes to keep to themselves, and you're thinking, I don't know, they've got some kind of cluster A disorder. I don't know if it's paranoid, that's why they don't like being around people, or schizoid, it's just natural, they don't want to be around people, or schizotypical, where they wouldn't mind being around people, but it's just kind of strange for them to do so, or people find them strange. I want to see a good discussion, a really good paper, really good presentation is going to have some discussion, when relevant, of potential, what we call a dual diagnosis, right, or a competing diagnosis. That is to say, we're looking to see if this person's got this one trait of isolating and not having a lot of social interaction, and I'm thinking that's a personality disorder. By the way, that might also be not a personality disorder, but a different type of axis 2 disorder. Perhaps it's autism, maybe that's something that's going on. But I want to rule these things out. So what I'm saying is as you begin to sort of list these features of these folks that you're finding, I want to see that you're able to say, I'm giving you these 7 ways in which that person has traits of being a narcissist, but 3 of these traits also could be an antisocial personality, and 4 of these other traits could also be a histrionic personality. But given all 7 of these traits, it seems to make more sense that this person would have more in common with a narcissistic diagnosis than they would with a histrionic or an antisocial diagnosis, right? So I also want to see that you're looking, not only do they meet criteria for this thing, but what else could it be? And why did you choose the one that you went with? Why is this paper on how Bugs Bunny is a narcissist and not why Bugs Bunny has narcissistic traits, instead of why or how Bugs Bunny has histrionic traits? So why did you choose that diagnosis over this other diagnosis? So again, looking for those pervasive and inflexible pieces, and looking for those potentially differential diagnoses that could show up, and explaining why you've chosen this diagnosis. Don't just say, hey, it could be this, it could be this, throw your hands up at the end of paper. I want to see, could be this, and here's why we went with this, okay? So also looking for those things. If you do both of those things, in addition to just getting those pieces in, showing me some examples, connecting the dots for me, if you do that dual diagnosis piece, and then if you do that ruling out piece, more often than not, right? I mean, students have surprised me before in ways to get a worse grade than they could have gotten. But if you do those 2 things, you're looking at approaching, if not right in the midst of an A paper. So if you just do this is Bugs Bunny, here are the ways in which he could have narcissistic traits, the end, B- if your writing is really, really good. If you're just, not a good writer and you're just kind of giving me the bare minimum, that's a C paper. So that's basically what you need to know. I will post, I think it's in the syllabus, but it might not be. I often kind of hide paper details in the syllabus for those of you who like to jump way ahead, and then I have to give you a C because you didn't hear me say what could get you an A. So I often hide those things. So it may not be in the syllabus, but I'll make sure. And then I'll post, of course, on Blackboard, a place for you to submit that. And also in that space, I'll leave some of the details for how long it needs to be, this type of thing that you're probably asking me about right now. So Let's move on to try to get through at least a couple of these disorders, and we may not get to all of them because this is a pretty lengthy and dense set of disorders. If you've heard of any personality disorders, and I think I say this in the intro video, if you've heard of any personality disorders, you've probably heard of some, if not all of the ones on this list. Histrionic's probably the one you've seen least frequently, but some of the other ones you've probably seen or heard of, or maybe not heard the actual name of, but you know about in the media and different things, maybe in other psych classes and stuff. And so these have a lot of research to go with them. Many of them do, as opposed to some of the other ones that we're looking at in Cluster A and Cluster C, which we'll look at in the future. One of the reasons this is because these tend to be some of the more intense disorders. Even within the full list of the DSM, not even just personality disorders, these disorders tend to be some of the more difficult ones to treat. Certainly all the personality disorders are really, but they also tend to be some of the more difficult ones to interact with, some of the ones that can cause more distress and stress in the individual's life, but also in some of these cases, more importantly, in the lives of other people. So these are ones that you've probably heard quite a bit about, and so don't be surprised if some of this stuff is old news, or it's something you've heard before but you didn't know it was called that. So let's just start right off at the top with the antisocial personality disorder. By the way, if you remember, these disorders are known as the dramatic and erratic disorders. Right. So dramatic just means drama, extra, overdone, kind of colorful type person or people, and then erratic means kind of not having any form, kind of chaotic, kind of anything could potentially happen. So that kind of gives you a feel of what these disorders are generally like, very, very generally like, and why they've grouped them together in the same cluster. Again, this cluster doesn't necessarily mean that they're super more alike than any other ones, but again, for teaching purposes, it's often helpful to think of them in this way. This, by the way, is the cluster I was thinking when I was talking about Cluster A, where you could slide in a paranoid personality into this cluster too. That would make it, by far the largest cluster. The others only have 3, and that would give this one 5. But again, that's really just to say these things hang together, but you could rearrange them a bit. It wouldn't be too big of a deal. So the antisocial personality, before I just get to the diagnostic criteria, the antisocial personality is basically known for having a lack of empathy. That's how a lot of folks would put that, and that's pretty true. One of the things that we are finding out, though, about folks with antisocial personalities is that they do have empathy, some of them at least, but it's just not automatic. For us, if you see somebody hurt, and what empathy really means, by the way, is not like magically, I just know how you're feeling, it's not telepathy. Empathy means that I can see that you're hurting, I can see that you're sad, I can see that you're angry, I can see that you're upset, I can see it on your face, your body language, how you're talking, whatever it is. And just by virtue of those signals, just by virtue of me seeing how you're behaving, I will get some of that feeling, right? I will feel upset too if I see that you're upset, especially if I'm the one upsetting you, right? If you're getting angry and I'm the one making you angry, I'm probably gonna get angry too, right? If you're, if you're anxious and we're in the same environment, I'm probably gonna get anxious too, right? Not necessarily like chain reaction of panic attacks, but it's gonna make me feel a little bit. It's gonna make me feel a little bit of that. And that's what empathy is, right? It's one of the reasons Humans don't hurt each other as much as they could, is because it hurts me to see you hurting, right? Even if I don't know you as a stranger and I punch you in the face and you're bleeding and you're crying and you're distressed and how did you do that, right? I'm gonna feel a little bit bad, right? I'm gonna feel a little bit of that pain myself. And so that's what empathy really is. It's that ability to almost non-verbally and directly communicate the feeling, right? Not even the thought, but literally the feeling. I'm feeling sad because that person is sad. You watch all these YouTube videos. I don't know if folks watch like fail videos, right? But you wince when you see somebody get hurt because, right, that's empathy. That's what that is that sense of feeling what somebody else is feeling. And what we see is that folks with antisocial personality disorders have a real diminished capacity for this. So that might mean altogether, or we used to think altogether it meant that they didn't have any empathy at all, but what we're learning is it's just not automatic. It doesn't necessarily turn on at its happening. That is to say, if you see somebody hurting, let's say I say something rude and I hurt somebody's feelings, well, for a person who doesn't have this disorder, they would go, oh no, I mean, they may not apologize, they may still stand behind what they said, whatever it is, but still I'm gonna feel that little bit of like, okay, I hurt the feelings a little bit. I'm still gonna feel that automatically. If you take somebody who's got this disorder, if you take somebody who's got an antisocial personality, they might not feel that automatically. They might not feel anything about it. But what research has been suggesting is that if I said to that person, now, can you imagine how what you said made that person feel? That they can do that. They can go, oh, yeah, that probably wasn't their best thing to say, right? That they can still step into that place. So it's not a total lack of empathy. It's not like that part of their brain was excised, but it's a part of their mind, at least, that doesn't kind of switch on as automatically as for most of us it does. So what does this look like? I have a bit of a bone to pick. I'm going to read the DSM Diagnostic Criteria, but I have a real sort of bone to pick with how it describes this disorder in the DSM. And to explain why, I do have to give you a little bit of a history. So many of these disorders, again, kind of came out of, well, what are going to be some issues of working with this potential client in a therapy practice? So again, thinking maybe like a schizoid doesn't want to be around anybody. They certainly don't want to probably be around somebody who's asking them to tell them about their feelings, tell me about your feelings, this type of thing. And so those things can kind of get in the way. And so you'll see here some of these also fit that bill. And of course, an antisocial personality would certainly fit that bill, but that's not really how it came together. The way this disorder, the way this diagnosis came together was people asking, why are people bad? Why are criminals? And so what they did was they went to prisons and they said, let's see what these folks have in common. Let's see what makes these bad people, right? And this is before we had any idea of, folks with mental disorders are in prison more, folks that are poor are in prison more, folks that are of color are in prison more, right? All of these things that are really, sort of bad for collecting data if what you're really trying to get at is evil, really, right? Maybe some people in prison are evil, certainly, but some of them are in there because they had bad luck or because this was their economic viable way to kind of get out where they thought they were coming from, and they got caught, right? So there's a lot of other people in here than people that are just evil, what makes people evil. So they went to these prisons and they gave them surveys, and answer all these questions, and basically we create a norm, right? We try to figure out what are the things that correlate together, what are the things that show up that seem to be in common with all of these people. Well, what you're going to see, and I'm not kidding, is that what they figured out that they all have in common is that they committed crimes. And for whatever reason, they have not gone back and thought about the psychology of an antisocial personality rather than just the commonalities of the folks in that first sample. Now, you are likely to find people with an antisocial personality disorder in prison. You certainly are probably more likely to find them than in the general population, probably. But that doesn't necessarily encapsulate what's going on for these individuals psychologically that would let me identify one in the general public, right? If I'm looking, and I haven't read these to you yet, but you'll see, if I'm looking for criminality as a sign of a certain psychological condition, well, one thing we also know about antisocial folks is they tend to be pretty smart by this time, right? They tend to figure out how to hide their intentions. They tend to figure out how to get away with things. They may not be empathic, but they still want to protect themselves. They still don't want to go to jail. They still don't want to pay fines or have, people ostracize them even, right? They still want to kind of be able to live a happy and healthy life. And so many of them probably are smart enough not to get in prison. Many of them are probably smart enough to not show up as being a criminal, even though they have this lack of empathy, even though they have this way about them. So the fact that the DSM really focuses in on the criminality aspect of it, it really throws me for a loop. It really means that we're going to catch some folks who aren't really antisocial. And again, thinking about these folks who are low SES, thinking about these folks who are of color, thinking about these folks who maybe have other mental issues that are getting captured in this because they end up in the criminal justice system, and then they go to a counselor whose job it is to figure out if, what needs this person has, and they're really used to seeing folks with antisocial, so here's probably just another one. Yep, checks the box, is a criminal, that's why they sit here. And so, we get these folks who don't necessarily get their needs met in terms of what's actually going on with them, and we miss the folks who are actually antisocial personalities, which really does lend itself to a different set of morals and values and ethics and willingness to do certain things, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So let me just look at the diagnostic criteria here. This is on page 659 of your DSM. Mine's obviously really old, and so again on page 659, another issue with this is you'll see that you only need 3 criteria, and there are 7 of them, which is the typical number, but you only need 3 of these to meet criteria for an antisocial personality. I would venture to say, this is an opinion, I think a lot of folks would agree with me, I would venture to say that antisocial personality is probably the worst diagnosis that you could give to a person in terms of that diagnosis affecting anything a diagnosis could affect. That is to say, in terms of them seeing another doctor, in terms of how those doctors are going to treat them, in terms of any special needs that they might mean, in terms of entry into anything where they're checking in some states, in terms of buying guns, right? All of this different type of stuff is probably the worst disorder that you could be diagnosed with. So the fact that it's such a low bar, and the fact that I think they've kind of gotten it wrong. We do understand antisocial personality disorder, but the fact that the main book that we tend to use to diagnose is really off the mark in terms of how it's going to diagnose a person is the reason I'm harping on it so long. So let's look at those so you can join the fray here. So again, page 659, antisocial personality disorder. A pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15, as indicated by 3 or more of the following. Now, there is something nice in there that they're trying to be careful about. They do lower this, not just beginning in early adulthood, right? That could be 25, 28, 30, something, hell. But they say 15, right? You need to have been seeing this since 15. So there is one way that they're raising the bar, but then they go right back and indicate it as indicated by 3 or more of the following. That's not many. You need 5 to get diagnosed for depression, right? I mean, somebody comes in and they're like, I'm sad, I can't sleep, and I'm eating like shit. And do you think I'm depressed, doc? And I say, no, you don't meet 5 criteria, but oh, you got a traffic ticket. Here we go. All right. So number 1, I'm going on tangents. Number 1, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest, right? It does not say even. It does not even say by repeatedly being arrested. It says by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Well, if you speed a few times coming down the highway, by the 4th or 5th time, that's probably grounds for arrest. And every time after that, it's probably grounds for arrest. I don't mean to belittle it, but, and that's a far-fetched one even, but I just mean to say, the fact that it's grounds for the arrest, not even arrest, is again making that bar really low. The fact that this is the first criteria, and remember we sort of talked about how these things are probably statistically derived, and the ones that are most common, the things that seem to be most in common, rises to the top. Well, again, if you're norming on a criminal population, well, guess what's going to rise to the top? The fact that they are all criminals. Right? And so this is why, in general, when we look at these, we get a real clear picture in that first criteria of what the disorder is. But here, all we have is some data confusion of the fact that everybody was a criminal. So, well, the first criteria for being an antisocial personality is you've done things that could be criminal. Everybody's done things that could be criminal. Everybody's done things that could be repeatedly that could be criminal. So, for me, this throws it off the mark. Maybe you could put it down at like the 7th or 8th criteria, but as the first one is the thing that you're looking for, I find this to be a problem. Again, thinking about who might land in this spot based on their identity, based on how their economic status, based on their mental status, otherwise, who's likely to be performing acts that are grounds for arrest? What's their life situation like? And is that the same thing as having this disorder where you can't have any empathy, or you have a hard time at least having empathy? So, number 2, deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. This to me sounds quite American. I'm being flippant here, but again, it's not anything psychological. It really is just saying, here's a person who is lying. Now, what they're trying to get at is the fact that if you are not empathic, if you don't really feel what other people feel, and what's really going on in the mind of the antisocial personality is that they figured out at an early age that nobody's going to help them. You remember us talking about reactive attachment disorder and how that's connected to this disorder. We've proven this in research. We've suggested it in research, I'm supposed to say. And the borderline personality also has a connection to that reactive attachment disorder. So what's really going on psychologically, we think, is that this person has figured out nobody's going to help me. I've been neglected since before I was 2. I've been abused perhaps since before I was 2, and I need to do whatever it takes to get by. I don't need to worry about how that person's feeling. I don't need to worry about what that person thinks of me. I just need to make sure that I can get my next meal. I need to make sure that dad doesn't hit me again. I need to make sure that my little brother is protected, whatever it is, right? It's just this kind of direct line of thinking, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. And so that's what they're trying to get at, right? Is that if you have this mindset of, I'm gonna do whatever it takes, maybe you're more likely to end up in a criminal situation. Maybe you're more likely to lie because you don't necessarily see that it's gonna hurt anybody, or you don't feel that it's hurting anybody in that moment, but it's protecting you. I own that car, give me the keys, right? Well, now I've got this awesome car and I can do whatever I want with it, right? That's sort of where this is. And so deceitfulness is indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, conning others for personal profit or pleasure. Sure, we can get there, but that's almost a byproduct of what's really going on which is to say this person lacks empathy, this person is doing whatever it takes to get by. And that's where I would have started these criteria, not just with this person does things that could get them arrested and this person lies a lot. Well, that can really be a lot of folks in a lot of situations. Number 3, impulsivity. Here we are, right? Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. All right, so you're impulsive. You've lied more than I think is a good thing. And every time you come see me for an appointment, you speed. After the 3rd one, you could have been arrested. And so this is your 10th session. You have done things that are repeatedly grounds for arrest. All right, I'm going to put antisocial in your chart here. All right, you've met the criteria. It bothers me. Number 4, irritability. Right? Irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Okay, that's at least a little bit more grounded than just being irritable. But again, this tells me nothing about the psychology of this person. I do not understand, if I'm just reading these criteria, what's going on for this person. I just know that they're doing bad things. That is also, I think, problematic in psychology, that we have this disorder that is just, these people do bad things. When our job, almost ironically, is to be empathic. And so to even list the disorder in a way that's unempathic is, like I said, ironic. Number 5, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Okay, that's fine. Again, I'm going to keep saying the same stuff. Doesn't really get at the psychology of it. And I can think of a lot of other disorders or just times in a person's life when this would be true. Number 6, consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or to honor financial obligations. This just means that this person is, consistently irresponsible, right? They don't pay their bills on time. They maybe break contracts, this type of thing. They don't really give us any intention here, so I don't know a lot what to make of it, but the first thing that I think of when I read that is ADHD. I don't think of an antisocial personality, somebody who forgets to pay their bills, somebody who forgets that they were in a contract, somebody who's impulsive, right? All of these different things could be a lot of other things. And in fact, we do see a lot of folks with ADHD in the prison system because they get themselves in trouble either by not following through with things or by being so impulsive that they get themselves into trouble. So this may just be capturing some of those folks. And then finally, number 7, the very last symptom, we actually get something that for me is what's really going on. This should be criteria 1, maybe even 1, 2, and 3. Number 7, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or having rationalizing hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Now, finally, we're getting into something that's looking at the psychology. This person has a lack of remorse related to the things that they're doing. Rather than just listing all of the things that they could possibly do, you can almost just list these all in one criteria. This person has committed crimes or has committed things that could be grounds for arrest. We already get that one, and then they list it 5 more times before giving us something that is psychologically relevant. I'm sorry to go on this tangent, but it's just wild to me that, again, this is such an intense diagnosis, and we've been so, I think, irresponsible with how we're encapsulating it, how we're describing it to the public, how we're describing it to other clinicians and students. And so that's why I spend so much time here, just making sure that you get that this isn't a great job. This is not a great job. Read some articles. The DSM is not the Bible of psychology. It is a highly referenced book. So if you're really interested in this one, especially if you're going to do your report on it, I would suggest that you read some different articles, that you read some different understandings of what it means to have this particular disorder, what it looks like, what it feels like. And then, of course, I will be posting some videos such that you can see some examples of how people show up with this, what it actually looks like versus, you know, they are a criminal. So that's that. It does say here, of course, and it will say this for most of the disorders, that they need to be 18 years old to diagnose it. Again, we're looking for beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, right? And so even though we are saying you have to have seen some of these behaviors since 15, you can't diagnose it until they're 18. And I actually think that's higher than some of the others. I think many of the others are 17. And I think it's 18 here because of the severity, if you will, of the diagnosis. So take that as you will. I will post some things, some examples. I also think I have some videos where there's some other experts talking about the different types of antisocial disorder. Some folks kind of split it up into 2 different types, by the way. If you didn't know, I guess I should have said this, we tend to call these in public settings the sociopath or sociopathy and psychopathy. So the sociopath and the psychopath. There's a kind of a split hair difference between them. I've heard a lot of people give me sort of subtly different answers as to what the real difference is. Really, there's not a difference, of course. You know, the official diagnosis is the antisocial personality. The DSM does not differentiate between these two, but I've heard people like to have this distinction. So the sociopath is said to be somebody who kind of goes in and out of these very unempathic moments, right? Who maybe will do something unempathic in a moment, almost impulsively, and then later think about how terrible that was or feel bad for having done it, but still can't stop themselves from kind of going back and forth into being unempathic and maybe doing something hurtful, but later can come away and reflect on the fact that that was mean, or I can't believe I did that, or whatever it is. Whereas the psychopath, folks like to say, is kind of in that mode all the time. They know what they're doing it on purpose, and they're not going to come away having any negative feelings about it. They might just come away saying, you know, boy, I did a good one there, man. I can't believe they never figured that out, right? They're going to have sort of a positive or neutral feeling about the types of things that they're doing, probably more positive if they feel like they're being successful. One thing you'll see, and I think this is going to be one of the videos you'll get to watch, is that although folks with antisocial personality tend to lack empathy, they are really smart about people. They're really smart about thinking about how a person would respond, because they use that in their manipulation tactics. They use understanding that this would make you sad, or this is going to cheer you up, which is going to make you more likely to do something good for me. Okay, so so they think of things like that, right? It's not this sort of natural, oh, that made her really happy, you know, let me pay her another compliment. I like, you know, her happy makes me happy. So no, it would be something like, okay, there's that compliment I gave you, so can I borrow your car? It's so pretty, you're so pretty, right? That there's this kind of manipulative aspect to it. There's an online community I found a couple years ago. I wrote an article about it on Psychology Today. If you Google it, you'll probably find it. But it talks about this like online community where folks with antisocial disorder are trying to help each other kind of live in a regular society. I think it's like Sociopath Pro Tips or something is the name of the community. So, but it was really interesting to me because what you see there is, sorry, just making sure the video didn't stop. It's really interesting to me because what you see there is folks giving each other tips about interacting with other folks, and if you read them, they seem really manipulative. But if you read them again, you'll realize that we do these things anyway. We just don't really do them on purpose usually, or just don't know that we're doing them on purpose usually. So for instance, it would say something like, if you want somebody to do you a favor, bring them small gifts until it's time to ask for that favor. Now, if you think about it like that, if you're sort of plotting it out, right, it is certainly manipulative. But if you think about the way that we interact in an empathic way anyway, that's something that they just wouldn't do naturally. If you think about the fact that, maybe every day on my way to work, I pick up 2 coffees and I give one to the secretary, just because I know she likes coffee. And I'm not doing it for a reason, but, I know she likes coffee and it makes me feel good to, make her feel good. And then one day I totally forget that I double scheduled a class for the next semester, and I need her to, can you please give that class to Dr. Carter? Like he's, he really would like to teach it, or maybe he wouldn't, but just give it to him anyway, right? And because we have this relationship, because she sees me in a positive light, she says, okay, don't tell Dr. Carter, I'll put it on his schedule, or something like that, right? And so what I did was I was giving her gifts until I needed something, and then I got it because I'd been giving her those gifts. But I wasn't doing it for that reason. It was just how we interact in an empathic way. I did something for her because it felt good to me, and then she had a certain likability to me, and then when I asked her for something, she wanted to do it because she liked me and it was gonna make me happy. Right? And so for people who don't have that empathy, who don't feel that, oh, I like this person and I'm gonna do this just because it feels good to me to see them happy, they have to sort of think of those things. They have to sort of think, well, what sort of nice things should I be doing to get people to do things for me? Like how do I get to my schedule changed? How do I get, those front row seats? Like, how did you get that? Oh, I just knew the guy. Like, we go out to, baseball all the time, I buy him a couple of drinks, and he just gave me these tickets one day, right? That's the sort of thing that just naturally happens for those of us who don't have that empathic deficit. But for folks who do, they really have to think through these things. So I don't want to call it good or bad, but I just want to know, right, that's that psychology, the psychology of, I have to think how to get things for myself. And again, thinking about that history, that's where their mind goes. Me just being a nice, cute baby who needs to be fed, and mommy's gonna see that I need to be fed, and so she's gonna feed me, right? And she's not gonna hurt me while she's doing it, right? All of these things that kind of build up in us this ability to do that back to other people. This person didn't get that. They didn't get those lessons of people help each other, and they just do it because, and it'll come back around to you sometime, but in the meantime, just be nice. They don't get this lesson, and so they have to sort of institute it in this sort of highfalutin way, which when read seems manipulative. So go check that out. One of the things I would like to share that I think is fascinating is the #1 tip on this site, on this page. You'll never guess it. I'll give you a second. Nope. It is remember to yawn. This is fascinating to me because it clicked in my head upon reading this that yawning, right? That excuse me. Did you yawn? Good. Maybe you're not a sociopath. That yawning is empathic. That it is an empathic, it's not quite an emotion, I guess. I mean, we don't really understand yawning, but the fact that I yawn and maybe you yawned, or you maybe felt like yawning, but you didn't because you didn't want to be that guy. But the fact that got communicated even through a video perhaps is empathy. Your dog will do this. My dog does this every morning when I walk in. I yawn at him to make him yawn. I think it's funny. But folks with antisocial personalities don't have that. It's like a real demonstration of this empathy that they don't have. And so when someone yawns, I mean, and we don't always yawn when we see other people yawn, but apparently they almost never do it. They almost never get that transmission of, oh, I'm yawning now too because you're yawning. And so the #1 tip on that site was remember to yawn. Remember to yawn. which I don't think that most folks would go, Jeremy doesn't yawn, he's a sociopath, or I think he's got antisocial. I don't think we would do that anyway, but it's interesting to me that they are conscious of that they may even be self-conscious of it in that way, that they have to remind themselves, and that it rose to the top in terms of being the number one tip. Remember to yawn. All right. So we've got a few more minutes. I cannot see my clock here. Good. So I think we can go ahead and get into borderline personality disorder. And we'll probably stop after this one. But the borderline personality disorder is probably the second most severe and kind of intense disorder, certainly of the personality disorders. I don't know that I would broaden it to the whole DSM at this point. Antisocial, I think, stands above just the whole DSM, but borderline probably, a very close second within the personality disorders at least. And I think you maybe heard me say in a previous class that antisocial kind of represents the reactively attached child growing into a more masculine personality disorder. That is to say, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'll tell these people whatever they need to hear. I'll bust heads if I have to, and obviously with sociopaths and psychopaths, hey, maybe I'll murder some folks if that needs to happen as well, maybe just for fun, right? That this sort of straightforward, I'll do what I want, I'll take no prisoners, this is sort of a masculine display of, I need to make sure I get my needs met. I need to make sure that I get what I need. Nobody's going to give it to me. I'll take it. I will take it, right? So here we have antisocial. The borderline kind of represents a more feminine approach to this, I think. And we do see, by the way, that more men are diagnosed with antisocial personality and far more women are diagnosed with borderline personality. Now, some folks would argue that in both cases, you may actually have a man who's got a borderline, but we tag him as antisocial because we do tend to think of these diagnoses in gendered ways, both of them, and vice versa for a woman, that she may actually have an antisocial personality, but we tag her as borderline because we are expecting that a woman would be borderline. So I'm not making that up, that there are these sort of gendered ways, but I am also noting that in some piece of that may just be kind of a gender bias, in addition to the fact that there is some actual proof that men are more likely to be one and women more likely to be the other. So for the borderline personality, rather than kind of going directly, this personality really leans into the manipulative aspect of getting their needs met. So they're not going to necessarily directly take some of these actions themselves. They are going to convince people around them that they need to take that action for them often. Now, what this looks like and what accompanies this, I guess I should say, is this sense that I need to have somebody excuse me. So what this looks like is they have this feeling of, I need to have somebody around me to make sure that I get these things met, to make sure that, in some cases, just that I feel like a whole, complete, safe, cared for person. So sometimes just having that person around really isn't about getting anything other than that kind of affirmation, that confirmation, that support that just having somebody in your life can bring. But in other cases, it's a little bit more about, hey, I'll get this person to do that for me. And in that way, sort of approaching a little bit more of an antisocial personality, where again, the borderline is about getting this one broad need met, which is to say, keeping this person in my life. The borderline personality disorder is often kind of tongue-in-cheek described as the disorder of, I hate you, don't leave me, right? This sort of push-pull of get out of here, but don't go too far because I love you, and if you don't come back, I'll be really upset, but get out, right? So what we tend to see with these folks is that they have this real sort of, this bipolar. I mean, I don't know how to say it better. That's the real word, not the disorder, but this sort of bipolar relationship with people that are close to them. Again, that I hate you, don't leave me, that kind of back and forth. And what you're going to see the DSM say, who does do a lot better job of describing this disorder, by the way. What you're going to see the DSM say is that they go from idealization to devaluation, which is to say, in one case, they idealize. In one case, they say, this is the best person I've ever had. I've never been so lucky to be in such a great relationship. You're amazing. You're the best, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll flip right over and say, this asshole, I can't believe I looked at you for 2 seconds. You're lucky. I'm dating you. Get out of here, blah, blah, blah. Don't go too far, right? Can you please come back? I'm so sorry I said all those terrible things. You really are the best boyfriend I've ever had. And I will never say anything like that again, and blah, 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 blah. And so you'll get this sort of real back and forth of, again, idealization, you're the best person ever, and then devaluation, where you're the worst person ever. And you'll see these folks go kind of back and forth in terms of treating, especially the person that's in their life, that's usually a romantic partner, or perhaps a best friend, or perhaps a parent, or even a child, unfortunately, where you'll see them kind of go back and forth to do these things. Now that is sort of the crux of it, but you will see a lot of other behaviors and emotional issues kind of manifest from there. So for instance, one thing that you'll see when we get to the criteria is that folks with bipolar disorder, I'm going to mix them up all the time, I'm sorry. Folks with a borderline personality disorder are often likely to threaten suicide. And I don't want to invalidate and I don't want to belittle that threat, but in my experience and in my understanding, it is really more of a threat. It really is more of the attention-seeking threat. That isn't to say that they wouldn't follow through on it. That isn't to say that maybe it was a bona fide threat and they were just pretending. I'm going to cut this way so I don't actually bleed out, but it'll freak them out. So, but then they actually die, right? So I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, that these suicides don't occur, but I understand about suicide, and we've talked about in this class what it looks like, right? When you're really suicidal in the way that is a real danger, like if I leave this person alone, they may kill themselves. They're not making a statement. They are just done. That looks like numbness. That looks like not looking forward to anything. That looks like not wanting anything. Certainly not wanting your boyfriend to come back, not wanting your girlfriend to get out of the house, right? Whatever it is. It's not this type of thing that you would use as a tool, because most folks who are actually suicidal don't want for anything. They've given up. They're not, I've said in the past, I'd rather see a person angry than numb. Because angry, you're still in the world, you still care, you still didn't want that to happen, and I wish I could change it, right? I'm still here, I'm still with it. If you're numb, who cares? Who cares, right? And so that's not usually where you find folks who are borderline. They're not in that numb place. They're usually in that, if you leave, if you walk out that door, if you don't come to my thing, I'm gonna threaten suicide. And so that threat of suicide, again, connected to that, don't leave me, right? I hate you, and I know I told you to leave, and you're leaving, you better not leave, right? That kind of, I'm gonna draw you back in type of behavior. So there are all of these things that kind of spread out of that. These folks often, put people in situations who are in relationship with them to feeling like they're not sure what they're supposed to do, whether they're coming or going, so to speak. That is to say, at one minute he loves me, at the next minute he's telling me to get out, and is it me? Sometimes I just feel like maybe I'm saying the wrong thing, and I'm trying not to say the wrong thing, but I somehow keep stumbling into that, right? And so that can make that person feel like their emotions are kind of all over the place, when really their emotions, they're, you know, responding to the other person's emotions. Their emotions are all over the place. And so I'm feeling some of that. I'm, you know, even just beyond empathy, I'm the target of that. I'm the result of that in some cases. And so that's going to make me feel my emotions going back and forth too. In my own personal experience, I've worked with more people. I tend to work with guys. And so I have worked with more folks who are in relationships with people with borderline personalities than I have actual borderline personalities. And so that's kind of where that's coming from, is that I've had partners in relationships come in and say, I think I have borderline personality disorder. And we talk through it, and they absolutely don't. And it turns out that their partner does, that their partner probably has this disorder, and because of the way their emotions are going back and forth, they're feeling that, the other end of that. They hate me now, and then they love me later, and so I'm pissed off at her when she hates me, and then, you know, when she loves me, it's so good. So I'm like, yeah, this is great, and then she hates me again. So like, why is she always right? And so my emotions are almost mirroring that, right? I like it when she likes me, and I hate it when she hates me. So I'm the one going back and forth, right? Is that my fault? And sometimes it's hard to disentangle that. Sometimes both of them are, to be quite honest. All right, so this is on page 663, borderline personality disorder. And again, you know, I won't have my old diatribe about antisocial, because this one does a good job. This one does a good job, I think, of getting to the psychology and being fair in terms of how you would diagnose this on somebody. Borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects. Affects just means emotional display. And marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. So we're back to 5, up from 3 again from the antisocial. I won't say anything else about it. Number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Here we have the real crux of the issue. Here we have the thing that probably you're going to see most in common with these folks, that really hits to the psychology of what the disorder itself is. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. That frantic is important because, again, it can look like threatening suicide. It can look like slashing tires. It can look like, you know, calling that person's work and telling a lie about them so they don't get that job or they have to move across state, right? These are the type of sort of frantic efforts, right? These are the type of things that a person might do to avoid real or imagined, right? I was just about to ask you to marry me, honey, so that you could come to St. Louis with me. But now I'm not gonna have the money to get married, right? So even if they don't know, right? Even if that abandonment isn't real, the sense of it can be so intense for the person with a borderline personality that they will act as if this person's gonna leave if I don't do X, Y, or Z. And so they go to these real extremes to try to keep that person in their life. Number 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating extremes of idealization and devaluation. So there's that piece that I was talking about where the person both idealizes and then flips to devaluing. This is the best person, this is the worst person, I could never live without you, I can't believe I let you in the house, right? And so they kind of go back and forth between this. Again, this can be a bit frustrating, if not sort of maddening for a person in the relationship with them. Number 3, and here's something that's a little off the beaten path, but it is something that I have tended to see in just descriptions and just tended to see in folks with this disorder, is identity disturbance. A markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. This means that this person would have a really hard time knowing what they're about, What do you like to do? Who are you on the inside? What's your, how would you act in this situation, right? They would have a real hard time pinning down who they are, how they would behave, how they would interact, how they would react. I was doing some personality research about a year ago, and one of the things I was interested in is how does personality perhaps map on some of these, not just personality, but personality disorders and otherwise. And so I posted this, I spend a lot of time in personality disorder communities, I guess, but I posted my research on the personality borderline community, right? And I said, hey, I'm doing this personality test, feel free to take it, I love it, blah, blah, blah. Well, some of the feedback I got was, I don't know how to take these tests. Like, I'm a different person from one moment to the next. I don't know how to answer these questions with relation to myself. I'm not really sure who I am. And that was totally unprompted. I was doing, something else in that research. I wasn't looking at that specific aspect, and yet it was interesting to see and just to hear, I guess, and it was anecdotal. I wasn't able to crunch in numbers to that regard, but anecdotally at least, a lot of these folks were telling me, I can't answer questions about myself. I'm not sure who I am. I'm not sure how I would respond in that situation. I'm not sure which of those I like best, right? That they don't have this sense of themselves. I had a supervisor once who said, borderline folks are it's almost like you can just put your hand right through them because they don't seem to have a makeup that is stable, psychologically, of course. And so you'll see this with folks, is that they don't have a real stable sense of self. They really have a hard time understanding who they are. They really have a hard time of even thinking about, I would say, their sort of past self, like who were you in that moment? Why did that happen? And who will you be in these other moments, right? Who are you likely to be persistently? What's your favorite color always, right? You're gonna have a hard time with some of those things. Number 4, impulsivity, again, in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. At least here, they give us some specifics of where that impulsivity can be, and not just, oh, you're impulsive, check mark in the antisocial box. I'll stop, I'm sorry. Number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, such as spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Do not include suicide. That's because number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior, right? The fact that you could have recurrent, just to be straightforward, recurrent suicidal behavior suggests that these were unsuccessful suicides, right? Recurrent, to meet this criteria, it has to be recurrent. And so, not that even a person who means to kill themselves or who's in that kind of numbed out state is always going to be successful, right? But they've sort of set that up for us, that it's going to be recurrent, which suggests, in addition to the fact that they're saying gestures, in addition to the fact that they're saying threats, they're being careful here, I'm being less careful, that really folks with borderline do not usually intend to kill themselves. If they do, it usually is a tactic to get the person back in the door or to get whatever it is that they're trying to get out of that situation. If you don't do X, I will kill myself, right? That's what this criteria is, even all the way up to, if you don't do X, I'll kill myself, I promise, watch, right? And they cut themselves, and now you have to get them to the hospital and bandage their arm or whatever. So it really is, again, just more of this tactic than it is sort of this danger of actual death by suicide, right? I mean, that it's always the danger if you're threatening suicide. But I'm going to be more concerned if I see somebody who's depressed and numb and doesn't care where his kids are right now, and has a gun in his car, right? That's the person I'm going to be really concerned about. Then I promise, if you don't do it, I'm gonna. Okay, well, we're gonna make sure that you're safe. We're gonna make sure that you can't do those things that you're talking about. But I'm not as concerned that if I don't get you back to a state of mental health that I think is appropriate, that if I let you out, you're not going to do it. Really, all I need to do is resolve this argument, and then probably you'll say you're not going to kill yourself. I don't mean to be so flippant. Number 6, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. Affective, again, just means emotional, and then instability, of course, so emotional instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. This means that this person is emotionally unstable, if you will, with regard to the things that are happening to them. So things are happening, they're gonna have this intense reaction. So in one case, right, you're taking your boyfriend to Disneyland, and it's amazing, and I've never been here before, and then, oh my God, you didn't get the super passes or whatever they're called. Well, so we're gonna have to, so you're telling me we're gonna have to stand in line here the whole time. You know, if you really loved me, we wouldn't have to stand in, you would have gotten them more expensive, you know, this type of thing, right? That happens sometimes, but that's gonna happen a lot with somebody who's borderline. When you see them who've got this really, you know, maybe they're in a really great mood, you're the best boyfriend, I can't believe you bought me tickets, I've always wanted to go here. Wait a minute, you're telling me, right? I bet that guy didn't buy his girlfriend these tickets. I bet look at them right in the front of the line. That's how much he loves her, right? And so you're gonna see this sort of marked reactivity of mood, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. That is to say, intense episodic dysphoria, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. Now, in some cases, this is just going to be a flip of mood, but often it's going to be reactive. It's going to be a reactive mood, right? This made me go way off in this direction, and then back way over back in this direction, right? And it can go vice versa, right? You really pissed off your partner and forgot their birthday, and we're spending it with your old high school girlfriend, and now she's calling you and freaking out, and you come back with a rose and you're on your knee playing a song, and she's, oh, you're my best boyfriend, I knew I could trust you, right? It's still the same, right? It's still just that back and forth. That's the real pattern. It's not that it's easily to make them happier than it is easy to make them sad. They usually are easy to kind of flip in both directions. Of course, the sad, the angry is going to feel more intense. It's going to be the thing that the person has more of a problem with. But if you look at the pattern, you'll see, you know, subtle little things made them think you were the greatest person in the world. Made you think you were the best psychologist in the world. My God, I can't believe you remembered my name. No other psychologist. You must be really good at your job, right? Next section, or we've only got 10 minutes left. Do you mind if we stop a minute early? Oh, is your next client more, right? It's this type of thing. It's this type of, it's easy to get them happy. It's easy to get them upset. Number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. That's kind of going to go with that sort of lack of identity, that lack of sense of who they are. But again, these folks will often report that they don't really feel anything inside. One of the videos you'll see me post, one of the psychologists is saying, despite the kind of outward emotional turmoil in what appears to be an inward emotional turmoil, the person often will say, I feel empty inside. I don't really feel like anything inside. Even though most people can see, like, you seem to feel a lot of ways inside. They will say, I don't know, I don't really feel anything. And they will often, due to that, there's this weird paradigm that happens, is because they don't feel anything, they will often blame their reactive mood on the person who made their mood react, right? I wouldn't have slashed your tires if you would have just come home in time or answered my call when I was worried that you were cheating on me. So I slashed your tires, but it's your fault. You should have just answered your phone, right? That they will still sort of feel that emptiness, and that they will still sort of feel like they didn't do anything wrong. It's not my fault. The world just orchestrated this to happen. And so we've got to figure out, we don't have to figure out anything. I got to figure out how to finish this video before my other class leaves and stops waiting for me. 2 more. Number 8, inappropriate, intense anger, or difficulty controlling anger. So again, really it's this reactivity of mood again, but the anger is going to be the thing that really is shocking, is going to be the thing that really hits people in such a way that that's going to feel like the problem. People aren't going to feel like the idealization, especially directed towards them, directed towards a therapist or partner. They're not necessarily going to feel that to be a problem in most cases. It's going to be that anger that hits them. It's going to be that she hates me, he did this really violent thing, he threatened to kill himself, right? It's going to be those things that show up. So we have this criteria here. And then lastly, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. Transient means in passing. Paranoid, of course, in particular, by the way. I think I said this in paranoid personality disorder, that paranoid in particular means that you think that people are out to get you. You think that people are plotting against you. So stress-related, so transient stress-related just means in passing, this person may think that when under stress, that people are out to get them, that people are out to hurt them, or dissociative symptoms, which means they kind of daydream, they kind of lose themselves, they kind of go away, they kind of stop reacting. So in some of those situations where they feel stressed, they may kind of just get real quiet and not kind of seem to be there. Again, dissociation is kind of just like daydreaming. Okay, so my grad class is outside waiting to talk to me about their theses. So I'm going to stop the video here. We will get to these last two cluster B personality disorders here pretty soon in the future. I will move your your paper date back just to make sure that we get all these in. So don't blow my email up, please. I'm always easy on due dates. You see, I'm not great with due dates, so I'm not going to hold you to that standard that I can't meet myself. So we're going to get through these, and then we're going to get through cluster C, and then your paper will be due probably a week after that last lecture. All right, I'll see you guys next week, and we'll look at the rest of these. Take care.